devices. This is aimed at being an introduction to changes that are coming into place for medical devices to introduce patient implant cards and patient information leaflets for implantable medical devices. I'm Jo Root, I'm the Policy Director at CHF, and first of all I need to apologise, I'm a bit croaky. I have a chest infection, so if I suddenly go mute and you see I'm coughing, you'll know why that is. So thank you for coming, for taking the time to come into this webinar. A few housekeeping rules. As some of you who've done our webinars, but if you want to ask a question, if you could put it into the chat section on the screen, add your chat, and we'll get back to the questions. Probably about halfway through, I'll stop and see if there's any questions that people want to answer, want to ask about what I've said so far, and there'll certainly be time at the end for questions and comments. If we don't get to all your questions or all your comments, we will try to capture those, and when we put the slides up on our website, we will try to answer those questions. In addition, the webinar is recorded, and we'll put the link to the recording up on our website after we've finished. So moving on then to this. We're just taking this as a very basic approach because some people don't know this, so if you know this part, you don't have to pay attention. What is the TGA? The TGA is a government agency, part of the Australian Government Department of Health. It's obviously responsible for ensuring all therapeutic goods, which is medicines and medical devices, are safe for consumers and fit for the intended purpose. And a fundamental part of the TGA's role and approach is to ensure that, on balance, the risks of the product are acceptable when weighed against intended benefit. And as well as initially assessing medicines and medical devices to put them on the therapeutic goods register, which means they can be used, it also has a key role in post-market performance of therapeutic goods and regulates the advertising of goods ranging from vitamins and sunscreens through to medicines, prescription medicines and medical devices. So it's got a broad range of, a broad remit. For the purpose of this, of the legislation and for the role of the TGA, what is a medical device isn't as silly as it sounds. Medical devices are, for this purpose, are used on humans, have therapeutic benefits, and generally have a physical or mechanical effect on the body, or are used to measure or monitor functions of the body. And they have a huge range. You know, we sometimes don't think of this, but you know, something like a Band-Aid or bandage is a medical device. And then it can go up to a high-risk product such as a pacemaker or urogynecological mesh, which is permanently implanted in the body. So there's a great range of devices, and there's 3 different classes of device. And we're talking for this purpose about the high-risk, permanently implantable devices that high risk, high value. In regulating medical devices, the TGA follows a risk-based approach, as I said. It depends on the classification of the medical device. They assess compliance, looking at quality, safety, and performance. They have, quite importantly, implement appropriate regulatory controls for manufacturing process. They then include devices on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, and, as I've said already, their post-monitoring. This does mean for both medical devices and medicines in Australia, we have a safe supply chain of medicines and medical devices. We monitor how they're produced. The manufacturing plant has to meet standard. And I think Australians probably take for granted the fact that we have high quality, safe medicines and medical devices. And it is a key role of the TGA that we need to always bear in mind. Not to say that it's perfect. In 2014 actually, government introduced a medicine and medical device regulation review, which was a national review to look at medicine and medical device regulation and to see how the regulations could be updated to ensure safe quality and to look at the level of regulation. And this review went on for some time. It was headed up by Professor Lloyd Sansom. And CHF put submissions in, and the review said about medical devices, the key recommendation for medical devices, as you can see on the screen, was recommendation number 20, which was to align the regulation of medical devices by the Australian National Regulatory Authority with the European Union framework wherever possible. And that's a key part here. So classification of medical devices, so our classification system is in line with the EU. We use the same essential principles and requirements, and we take a risk-based approach to variations to medical devices. We're a small player in the medicines and medical device business, global businesses. So it makes sense for our regulatory framework to be aligned with the other markets where people might be producing goods, and it allows us some confidence that how we're regulating is in line with others. I think it's true to say that the reviews, the government put out its review on this some time ago and accepted many of the recommendations of the review. In terms of the response to the review, the two key issues, apart from aligning with the European Union, was to introduce the patient information leaflet and the patient information card. And these, on the screen you can see, is the timetable for bringing in those regulations. Both the patient information leaflet and patient implement card are seen as critical to ensuring that we have a better understanding of who has a device implanted in them, when it was implanted, exactly which device was implanted, and it would allow us to, particularly the implant card, which is at the time of implant, for the patient to know what they've had put inside them. We've had recently the review, the Senate inquiry into the use of transvaginal mesh, and one of the, I think, disturbing findings from that Senate inquiry, from the lived experience of women who had been injured by transvaginal mesh and had mesh implanted, is that many of them had no idea what they'd had implanted in them. We had no way of actually capturing how many people had had the mesh, how it had been inserted, when it had been inserted. So doing anything like recall or alerting people to a problem or anything like that, incredibly difficult to follow up. And also it meant that really consumers probably weren't giving informed consent because they didn't actually know what had been implanted in them. And had, you know, if they were having a problem and went back to see somebody, well, you know, what did you have? Well, if you go back to the same doctor, you might have some idea, but if you went to a different doctor, you wouldn't have anything that showed exactly what had happened. And we'd had, as well as mesh, we've had previous failures of the regulatory system for devices, really, or problems with the system. We had the metal hip-on-hips, the hips metal-on-metal, sorry, my brain's not working. The metal-on-metal for hips caused problems. We also had problems with a certain sort of breast implant. So it's not without its problems, particularly when it's supposed to be a permanent implanted device into people's bodies. We probably need to do better, and that was the thing. And thank you, Kim, for the comment about no way to follow up on what we had. I appreciate you tuning in and making the comment, because I think it is important that we take account of people's who have lived this, who have the lived experience of these devices, and what they say might have helped them, I think is going to be critical to the work going forward. To have a patient implant card or a patient information leaflet, we're basically saying that an implant, the scope of requirements is there has to be an implantable medical device or an active implantable medical device, and it can get quite complicated. There are some devices which are exempt from this requirement of a patient information leaflet and patient implant card. As you can see, that a lot of the devices used for dental work, dental braces, fillings, and tooth crowns, which are permanent and are implantable, but aren't seen at the same category of risk, so aren't required. And all the clips and connectors and pins and plates and screws and everything wouldn't have a separate card or separate information. They're used to secure, to actually keep things in place. So if we turn to the patient information leaflet, the idea of the patient information leaflet is to, in some ways, mirror what we do for medicines. For medicines, I'm sure many of you are aware, we have the consumer medicine information leaflet, which tells you what the medicine's usually used for, any side effects to be aware of, and any problems that you might expect to see, and what to do if you have a problem. We don't have anything like that for devices at the moment. As we found with the Senate inquiry into transvaginal mesh, some women didn't even know that they had had a permanently implanted mesh put in. So I think the patient information leaflet is designed to be given to people to tell them what the device is, what they might expect, what side effects, adverse events they might have, and what to do about those adverse events. What we haven't, and up on the screen you'll see that we've highlighted there what information will probably be seen to be the minimum information that we might expect from a patient information leaflet. So information identifying the device, such as name, type, model, intended purpose and kind of patient on whom the device is intended to be used. So, you know, this is what it's for. These are some of the people it might be used for. It might also say people that it shouldn't be used for. And when you read a medicine leaflet, you'll see that it has that kind of information. Issues to consider before deciding to use the device, any special operating instructions, so anything you need to know about the ongoing precautions and procedures you as a patient need to undertake for, or a health professional need to do in conjunction with you, the intended performance, you know, what should be happening, and potentially undesirable side effects from using the device. I think this leaflet is designed for the consumer, so in the work that we're going to be doing at CHF on this for the TGA, we want to know what other information people might find helpful, and how we present that information. And then I think, you know, how many undesirable side effects do you need to know? Do you need to know the sort of the likelihood of that happening? There's a whole string of issues there that come up around how the information is presented, the level of detail. We don't want to scare people off completely, but we want people to have an understanding of what's being done to them. And one of the key questions which we haven't really, which the TGA has asked us to have a look at, is when you would get it. And you'll see that, you know, other information that we want is other useful information, where to go for further information, who the manufacturer or sponsor is, and the date of the information, because consumer medicines information leaflets are constantly being updated as new evidence comes in, as perhaps a manufacturer gets more feedback, or TGA gets more feedback that there are adverse events, then they get updated. And so we want to make sure that this is an updated document, that it has the latest information. The key issue about where to go for further information, I think is important. We have rules for how long people have, how much advertising, how much direct contact people of the manufacturer can have with the consumer. This is an attempt to bridge that gap. It's an attempt for the manufacturer to say, this is what you need to know. This is putting it in language that consumers can understand. This is where to go for more information, and probably included in that would be where to make a complaint or where to report an adverse event. I think that's a critical issue here about, if you've had an adverse event, who do you go to? We know this with medicines. We know that a lot of the women who had transvaginal mesh inserted didn't know where to go, didn't find they were believed. It took a long time before everybody accepted that the information was collated, and we could see that there actually was a problem that needed to be addressed, and we have to go there. I noticed there that Alison Marcus has said that we need to look at clinical registries. The problem is that not all devices fit into registries. We don't have registries for everything yet. We don't, for example, have a registry for mesh. And so if we have a registry, that's fine, but we don't have them for everything. And I think the decision to date has not been to mandate registries for everything. So this is, if you like, a step before a registry, might be seen as a step before a registry or instead of a registry. I think there's a lot of issues about registries that possibly need to be addressed before we go there. So, as I was saying, one of the key issues is when people might get such a leaflet. And before we go there, one of the issues here is, for this to form a part of informed financial consent, people would need to get it before they actually agree to the procedure. So unlike medicines, where you get the consumer medicine information at the time of dispensing the medicine, well, you're supposed to get it then when it's a new medicine. You can always look it up online before you go and get the prescription, but I don't think most people do that. I think it's probably people like me who take an interest in these things, and many of you out there will probably do that, but your average person probably isn't going to do that. So I think we would see that, and this is one thing we want to test, is when is the best time to give people this information? Who should it be given? Who should give it to a prospective patient? And what should go around it in terms of the conversation about it? We see it as part of, if you like, a shared decision-making. It's one of the tools in the toolkit of shared decision-making. Ideally, it would be, you've got this problem, we think this will help fix your problem. I'm advising, as the doctor, I'm advising that this procedure, this is what would work best for you. This is why, and then giving people an information leaflet to go away and take away and think about before they agree to have the leaflet. However, this is one of the things we want to test when we do our consumer focus groups and workshops, which I'm going to come to a bit later. About at what point in the conversation would this be of most use, and does what's in it, is the kind of information that's in it affected by when you give it to people. And I think that's one of the things I'd be interested in in seeing some of the issues here. And I think that's one of the key questions that we'll be answering about the information leaflet, and we see that as a pre-operative, a pre-implant piece of information that people can then keep, and they can either get it physically as a leaflet, it could be online, it can be both, in the same way as CMIs can be printed, or you can read them online, people know where to get them. So we need to think about the best way that people could get them. We do know that with consumer medicine information leaflets, many people don't read them. So one of the things that we'd like to explore in the focus group and the workshops down the road is how do we encourage people to use these? How do we encourage potential patients to read them, to ask questions about them? You know, we might want to adopt something like the Choosing Wisely Australia's things about, you know, the 5 questions you should ask. Or maybe we should have the 5 questions you should ask about your implantable device. Something that just triggers people to say, this is important, this is in permanently, this is something I need to find out more about. And we need the health professionals who are advocating to use these implantable devices to take some of the responsibility to work with consumers to help them be more health literate on these issues. So I think all of those are I mean, it's not just what's written down or how it's written down. We could get a good writer, we could do that, we want to test that, but we also want to test some of those other issues about how do we get people to read it. And I'll be very interested to hear if people have got ideas, because we might be able to then flow it the other way into some other work we're doing about consumer medicines information about this. So that's the information leaflet, which we see as the pre-implant. Then we move to the patient implant card, which is given to you at the time of actual implant. And following on from what is done in Europe, because we're trying to, the decision has been made that we will adopt the European Union standards on this, there has to be information identifying the device, including, very specifically, device name, device model, serial number, manufacturer's name, address, and website details. So it's actually not just you're going to have you're going to have urogynecological mesh implanted. It's you're going to have this particular type of mesh. This is the batch number. This is serial number. This is what's actually being put in you. And I think, you know, this is a significant step forward, so that people could have actually something which tells them all of that information. I think one of the things about the information identifying the device is one of the things we want to explore is what's the best way to give people that implant card? Is it a plastic card like a credit card that you get, your organ donation card, or your card saying you're on a particular medication or something? Is it a physical card? Is it a digital card? Could it be, where could it go? How could we put it? And, you know, what's its longevity? And this is the issue. The other issue, which is not part of the European Union standards, but is occupying the minds of some people at TGA and things, is how do we include a traceability function into that card? So giving an individual card with the serial number, the manufacturer's details, all of that might be very useful. But if we wanted to do a recall, that wouldn't help us unless we had some way of knowing who had these put in them. So some way of tracing a device model. If you liken it to the current debate of, excuse me, about some airbags, the Takata airbags, you know, they're able to trace which model cars these went into. People who've got those model cars get a thing on their registration thing saying, oh, your airbag might be faulty. You should really go and get it checked. Think if we can do that for airbags in cars, then we need to find a way to do that so that if a device is deemed to be faulty, if it's the device rather than the procedure that's put in it or the fact that perhaps it, then at least there should be some kind of follow-up. That's not part of the current patient implant card, but it's something that I think immediately comes up as a question when you look at patient implant cards. Well, how do we trace them? How do we know who's got what? So I think there's a few questions around the implant card. It would seem to make common sense that people would have that information at least. When you buy anything else, you know, you get all that information, you get a serial number, and you know, the address and website details might determine, you know, depending on how big the card is. If the card is only sort of the size of a credit card, you can put so much information on. If it's a digital card, if there's a whole range of things there, if it can be bigger than that, and then you can put more information. It's really about what we think will work, and I think this will change over time. I think that as we have changes, you know, who would have thought 15 years ago, or that so many people would have a smartphone, that we would be where we are with information. Everybody's moved to digital banking. A lot of people have moved to doing their banking online. You know, people don't go into a branch, they don't have passbooks. You know, we don't use cards anymore, we use our phones. So so what we need is to have a process that can adapt to technological change and innovation as it comes in. And that will be one of the tricks that what the patient implant card looks like now, and we'll go back to the timetable for that fairly soon, then it might change over time. So we need to give some thought to how we can make it durable and able to be flexible as technology changes. I think that's a critical issue there. I think, so what we're going to do now, and I will go to some of the commentary in a minute, and what we're going to do, and some of you have already, I think, registered to be on our focus group, we're putting together a consumer focus group to seek your feedback on the patient information leaflet and patient implant cards to ensure they are consumer friendly. So what we'll do is we'll send out a draft patient information leaflet that's been drafted based on an initial consultation that the TGA took with some consumers and consumer groups earlier this year, looked at what could be in a patient information leaflet, got their feedback. We've come up with a new version, so we're going to send that out to see what people think. So we'll say, what do you think? How will this go? What do you think will work here? We'll then iterate that a couple of times, get people's feedback. It'll all be online, this, or by teleconference. It's not a face-to-face workshop, but a face-to-face group. And we will take all the feedback and come up with a version that takes account of the feedback, but we will also provide the feedback to the TGA. So we'll say, this is what we put out, taking on board everybody's feedback, this is what we've got, and then we'll also summarise the feedback so that you've got a good understanding of where people are coming from. And we need to take into account things like, is it translatable? You know, there's a whole heap of issues that I'd be very interested to hear. You know, do we translate it? How do you present it in a way that, how do you get people to read it? How do you get people to hand them out? We know with consumer medicine information leaflets, they're not always given out to people. Sometimes consumers have to ask for them. CHF would say this shouldn't be something that a consumer has to ask for. This should be part of the discussion. If it's a shared decision-making tool, then that's what it should be. and it needs to be there. So we'll have the focus groups, and that'll be starting very soon. After we've done the focus group, we're going to have 2 face-to-face consultations, in part to go over the reworked leaflets, to just see from a different group of people whether there is anything outstanding, anything that shines that won't work, you know, that just isn't what will do, things like that. And then to talk about the dissemination. So how do we get the leaflets out, the patient cards out, the timing, what point in the process, how we do that, how we give them longevity, and then we will report back to the TGA. And I think it's worth remembering, and just, excuse me while I just go back through the slides, I think it's worth having another look at the timetable to realise why this is actually quite a truncated process. And this is not an ideal process, and I think, you know, some people might be saying, oh, you know, should we have done it? But, you know, if you look at that timetable, patient information leaflets and patient implant cards for new urogynecological mesh have to be in place by the 1st of December this year. So manufacturers need to be told what will be required of them. They're going to need to write them, they're going to need to produce their leaflets, and then we're going to say, and then they need to be ready to go for the first use from the 1st of December. So it isn't very much time. Same with surgical mesh for the patient information leaflet, and the same for implantable devices for new devices. We have got quite a short transition period, particularly for urogynecological mesh, only a year until existing devices. So new devices means things that have come onto the markets after the 1st of December, not everything that's used. But all existing mesh will have to have, used for urogynecological reasons, will have to have both a patient information leaflet and a patient implant card from the 1st of December. Seems a long way away, but it's actually not. If you think about having to produce them, having to take out your old stock, or attach this to stock, things like that. So I think that's quite a tight timetable, and to meet that 1st of December means that the industry has to have guidance in sort of August, September, which is why we have quite a short period for consultation. So going back to the focus groups, we've put out the call for the consumer focus group already, and I know many people have responded. We've drafted up a leaflet. We're hoping that will go out fairly soon. We'll have a couple of weeks for people to get input back, and then we'd be looking for, as you can see, the consumer workshops, one in Sydney and one in Melbourne, 16th to 17th of July. We do have the capacity to provide financial support for people who don't live in those 2 cities to attend. The numbers will be limited. We will put out an EOI. We're not just going to have it people that live in Sydney and people who live in Melbourne, but obviously there's going to need to be a mix of people at both of them. So we'll be advertising those fairly soon for people to attend those workshops and get that in place. And we'll do that through our normal EOI process and go through that. So basically that's the information. It is, you can find out more by going to the TGA workshop, TGA website. If you've got specific issues, then you probably can contact either me, Jo Root, at CHF, and we'll put, many of you have already got our email address, or you can send it to info@chf.org.au, but mine's j.root@chf.org.au, or we'll be putting more information up when we put the slides up. As Aisha's looking at the questions and we see what questions are, I noticed there's been quite a lot of discussion in the chat about putting this up on My Health Record. And I think, you know, this is would seem to be one of the most obvious places to put this information. The information that's on the patient implant card, My Health Record, would seem to be an obvious place. I think we need to remember that My Health Record is going to opt out, which means that people have to choose not to have a My Health Record, but they can do that. So My Health Record wouldn't cover 100% of the population. So we have to have something other than putting it on My Health Record. I think also that for many people, as we transition from having opt-in My Health Record to opt-out, where more people will have it, then we also are going to need to have a process of people using My Health Record, just having a My Health Record something. For this to work for patient implant cards, people have got to know that it's there. They've got to know how to use it. They've got to, and they need to know it was there. And it would seem that that's a little way down the track in terms of getting full implementation of My Health Record in terms of using it. But it seems to it's an obvious place for the information that's on the patient implant card to also go. And we need to at least have it that people could opt to put it there if they wanted. And, you know, I think people have, we need to make sure people understand that, you know, many people don't want to use My Health Record. We hope it's a very small number, but we'll see after we've been through the opt-out. I know people are also saying things like stickers, engraving it onto a bracelet. I think it all depends on people being willing to use that. Not everybody wants to have a bracelet that says, you know, I've got a pacemaker, its serial number is XYZ, and everything that's in such public view. I think it is about having maybe it's about having options, or I think initially the idea of the card was to make it a universal card. Everybody got the same thing with exactly the same information on it. I think if you wanted to get it somewhere else, then that would be a choice. But I think we're looking for a universal access thing. And I think, you know, I noticed Louise is saying technology apps surely can assist, and I think that's why I'm saying we need to have something that is technology neutral, if you like, that can have, we need to establish what information we want on the implant card, and then we need to look at how we can produce the card. We need to look at what else could go on. People increasingly are using apps to store information. People have apps to list their medications and what dose they're on and send them reminders. People have apps. But I do think we need to, at least at this point in time, remember that we do have a digital divide. We do have a percentage of the population who do not use digital means. So we have to have a solution that will work for those people as well. And I think, you know, I think there are shortcomings in a card. I think a cards, you know, people lose them. Not everybody carries a wallet. Increasingly, people just carry one card or don't even carry that. They use their phone for everything. So could it be as an app on your phone? It's probably the actual serial number. I think there needs to be a distinguishing between whether you want to identify, say, you've got a pacemaker or something, as opposed to, I've had a hip replacement, I've got a prosthetic hip, it's such and such. There's different reasons why people might need to have information in a hurry about what you've got, as opposed to a more considered information about, well, there's a recall, or I've got a problem, oh, I've refreshed my mind about that. So I think that's why those are some of the things that I think we're trying to look at about what solution will work from. I think people, yes, you can get implant details from your orthopod operation report. How long you're going to be able to access that. I think the women who had the mesh had great difficulty getting information, and Kim, feel free to chime in on that one. But I think it's not always easy to get at that information. It raises the whole issue about who owns your medical information. I think, and what you would do with it. And I think the idea of the implant card is that it is the consumer's. It's your card. It's got the details of what's in your body. What you do with it is up to you. But it does belong to you. And so I think it's an important concept that we provide something that the consumer owns and controls. And I note people are saying in Europe it is a card, and in the USA it's a card. In Europe they don't trace them. The European Union legislation stops at giving the patient the card with the information on. It doesn't have a traceability function. So which is why at this point in time, because we're mirroring the European Union's legislation, we do not have traceability. In the USA, there is the potential for traceability. People can opt to have their device registered so that it can be, so they can send something back to the manufacturer, which says I've got this model, this model, this model, like you do with some warranties. You have to send something back in order to active warranty for another product. So you can do that. TGA, the government didn't make a recommendation on that. That's still something that's up in the air about what it would look like, why would we do it, how time consuming, and how hard it would be to actually make it possible to get the information out there. So I think this is a first step. I think that's how we're looking at it. That's how CHF is looking at it. This is a first really important step in improve, and it's a health literacy issue, and it's an informed consent issue. That people would have so much better information with the leaflet about what they get, how they get it, hopefully make an informed choice about whether they'll go ahead, and then they get something that says, yes, you agreed, so this is what we put in you. If you need more information, go to X. And so hopefully that would make questions like how many of these do we have a little easier to answer than we have found in the past, particularly if we do go the next step of doing the traceability question. I think people are having a good chat, but there's not many direct questions to me, to us. As I said, if you haven't already, you should have a look and have a look on our website for the registration for the consumer focus group. You should keep an eye out for the EOI for the workshops, which will be half-day workshops, I think, in those two cities. And as I said, we would be happy to have people from interstate, and particularly anybody who is from a rural and remote area, and somebody, and if you have lived experience with having an implantable device, we would really like you to consider coming along, putting your hand up to come along, because I think we really want to make sure that that we get a good cross-section of views, because I think people who've had an implant would have a very different, may have had an experience which I think is incredibly valuable for us to know about, to shape what we do in the future. And I know many of women who gave their testimony to the Senate inquiry into transvaginal mesh and have done other things, have done it to try to make sure that this doesn't happen to other people. I know that Tom has asked a question now about My Health Record. Will CHF strongly support Universal My Health Record as a storage site? We are strong supporters of the My Health Record, and are one of the groups that pushed for the opt-out approach because we feel it's important that people have an electronic health record. We can see the benefits. So we would say that yes, it would be ultimately based on the My Health Record for this information, that what's on the patient card should go on to the My Health Record eventually. How long it takes to make the My Health Record able to take that is another matter, but we certainly would say that that's exactly, if the My Health Record is going to fulfill its purpose of having all your health information in one place, then that is a clear issue. Sally, I think, Sally Wortley, your question about clarifying who do you understand will be writing the information, it will be like with the consumer medicines information. It'll be written by the sponsor, but TGA will be providing guidelines about what goes into it. At the moment, the consumer medicine information belongs to the manufacturer. TGA there are certain information that it has to include, but unlike the product information, which is mandated, and the TGA can say you must do X, you must do Y. For the CMI, the manufacturer chooses to put in what it does. There are certain fields it has to include. So I think the information will be written by the manufacturers, but we would be putting up something that says what sort of information and the type of language they should be using. So we'll need to, that's one of the things we need to discuss, I think, about are we going to say they have to be approved, are we going to say, or not. I don't think this has been decided yet. So, you know, I think, do we do quality reviews of CMI of these the way that we did with CMI periodically? I think that's a good point. I think we need to have a look. We would certainly be encouraging manufacturers to consumer test what they write. You know, to actually say, well, this is how we think we write it. We think there are some ways that we can encourage and include what's written. The headings that are used, the examples of what we put under the headings. If you step it out enough, you know, you can make it that it's easier for people to understand. It's ultimately going to be up to the manufacturer because each device information that reflects that device. So it's unreasonable to think that will write them for them. So I guess we'll be looking to put in place, maybe talking to manufacturers about how they do this. And on that, CHF has a meeting with the Medical Technology Association of Australia. They're all coming to Canberra for 2 days, which is what industry groups often do, meet with politicians, have a discussion. They've invited CHF to go and talk with them, about 20 of the manufacturers and things that are members of MTAA, to talk about the information leaflet, to talk about what's in it, and to talk about kind of language. And we'll be using that opportunity to really reinforce the fact that they should get their own consumer testing, that they should actually pass these by consumers. These should not just be something that gets them off the hook legally, because it follows and it's written in legalese, and you know, you get down to page 12 of size 5 font and it says, you know, you might have expected X or Y. We actually want to be a bit more upfront about that. So I think we see this as an opportunity to talk to the industry about how they might talk to consumers and talk to people about what they're going to do. I think, you know, thanks, Paul. And you can thank the MTAA, they approached us. They knew we were going to do this piece of work, so they came to us and said, can we talk to you? Can we talk to you about what consumers want, about what, you know. So I think this is an excellent chance to have some dialogue and to have a conversation and to encourage them to make these device information leaflets much more consumer friendly. How do we get a retrospective clinical database and implant cards to be legislated? Well, we've got it. We've got it in. If you mean retrospective for people who've already got the part, got them, then that's not going to happen. It's only going to be for existing devices as they are put in. So we're not trying to go for a retrospective. This legislation doesn't give us a retrospective approach at all. We'll have, you know, we will see what we can do to encourage them to give out information. But if somebody's already got a device and they've had it in maybe 5, 10 years, they're probably pretty familiar with what it is, and it's going to be almost, it's not part of the agenda to look at making it retrospective. I think, and I think this is from Catherine about quality reviews of CMIs periodically. I think that, as I said, I think that's a good idea. I think that's something that we'll certainly be raising with TGA, and that's very helpful. And I think when we meet with MTAA, we would certainly be saying, you know, would you be up for this? You know, sometimes it's better to work in a collaborative fashion rather than trying to legislate for everything. So even if we don't have the legislation there, if we can sell it to them that it's worth their while, then I think, you know, we must we'll do that. I think, why is it so hard to access adverse event numbers on TGA website, Tracy? Well, that's a good question. Lots of people ask. I think the TGA is working on this, and I'm not being an apologist for the TGA here, but I think it is an area, what numbers, you know, it's hard to give total numbers. I'm not sure numbers are terribly helpful. I think the outcome of adverse events, I think that's something that certainly TGA is aware of, is looking to improve always the data that they put up on their website about, you know, and they're going to be taking on more in this regard. But, you know, what are the adverse events? Where can people get the numbers? We'll take that on notice and we'll talk to TGA, and we might see if we can get an answer for you there, Tracy, and put it up on the website with the slides when we put answers to some of the questions that people have. And I think it's, I'm not sure how, I notice there's a discussion about the retrospectivity. I think it's actually a separate discussion. I think it's a very valid discussion. I think it's one that in this context we haven't concentrated on, because I think the idea is that we're moving on to see what happens from now on, particularly in terms of informed consent and the information leaflet. I think I think the evidence at the Senate inquiry and from discussions and from the work that was done by our colleagues at the Health Issues Centre in Victoria with their Facebook survey of women who'd been injured by transvaginal mesh, clearly there's a need to do more about women who have had mesh implanted, who have been injured by it, who might be still injured by it in the future, and yes, and I think that the work that the work that Health Issues Centre did, and Danny Badash at the Health Issues Centre, really important work in identifying the problems. People can report adverse reactions without the serial numbers if they know what it was that was implanted, and they don't necessarily need the serial number. It's just an extra piece of information that would be helpful. But I think, you'd need to know the manufacturer, I would have thought, and some people didn't even know that so in the past. So I think the more information people have, the more fine-tuning you can get for adverse events. I think it shows up, it's not all of a class that is injured. It's not all of a class of products that's at fault. Sometimes it's how they're used. So there's a whole range of issues about what makes up an adverse event. And, I think the breast implants was clearly one particular breast implant that was at fault, not all breast implants. So one that was manufactured in one place overseas and became a problem, and it was a fairly confined problem. I think what the device card would help people with is to go, so people might panic, consumers might be really upset, might think, oh my goodness, that could be me. If they knew what had been implanted in them, then they'll say, oh no, that's not me. And I think that's a really positive side as well. I think we need to look at the positives of this. We have we have, on the whole, good regulation, high quality implants. We obviously have had some where this has not been the case, and I'm not undermining that at all. But we have had good, and we don't want to scare people into not having procedures, not having implants that can improve the quality of their life and actually save their lives in return. Yeah. And I think, that we need to make sure that we don't frighten people, we don't cause people to have distrust in all regulation of devices, we don't say that all this is bad or all that is. I think we need to, this approach allows us to distinguish between the products that work, the products that have the adverse effects, and allow people some confidence, more confidence in the system. I think our hour is almost up and I'm about to lose my voice, so I do apologise for that, and I apologise for the few coughs in the middle. There's another one. As I said, if you need any more information, you can contact me, or you can contact Leanne Kelly, who works at CHF, and many of you have got this. I'm j.root at CHF, and Leanne is l.kelly. Happy to provide you with any more information. If you have any more ideas, if you have some thoughts that arise out of this that you haven't had a chance to put in and everything, then please send them in to us. Either send us an email or give us a ring. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you all for taking the time. So with that, we might close the event. Thanks a lot, everybody.